Hello and welcome to this special coverage on the 51st session of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa and the Conference of Ministers, where we see different individuals and key stakeholders handling financial dockets within their countries deliberate and convene here in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, to tackle challenges and solutions for the African continent. Now, coming up today, we get a sense on what we should be on the lookout for the next couple of days, both on a macro and micro level. We speak to Dr. Abdallah Hamdok, who is the Deputy Secretary of the Commission, and of course Stephen Karingi, to just guide us through the trade division and the conversations happening there. Welcome to what should be a particularly interesting coverage on the future of the continent. We now have the ministers who should be engaging in different conversations across the African continent, just guiding us on some of these loopholes that need to be plugged into and what opportunities now lie ahead. Now, to give us context for this, we're joined by Abdallah Hamdok to just break down and unpack some of what we need to see as the conversations continue over the next couple of days. Definitely glad to have you here with us.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to be with you as usual.
All right. Let's just start things off with the expected impact. Of course, we're having this on the back of the AfCFTA, and there was a lot of buzz on the same. So you can imagine the pressure on you when what is being discussed here is not the same as what was there last year.
Thank you very much. Actually, this conference is happening at an opportune time. Just barely less than 2 months after the historic summit in Kigali, which signed the Continental Free Trade Area. We are very optimistic. This conference will provide an opportunity for our ministers of finance, planning, and economic development. These are ministers who are not, in many respects, party to the negotiation on the trade agenda that is dominated by trade and commerce ministers. But this will provide our ministers an opportunity to link the Continental Free Trade Area with the issues of the fiscal space and how its impact on transformation agenda, employment and jobs creation and all that. So we have high expectations that this will provide the ministers an opportunity to unpack this whole issue and see what are the pros and cons, the positive and negative on this issue, the gainers and the losers, short term, long term and all that. So we're expecting a very vibrant, vivid, dynamic and very in-depth discussion on this.
Now, of course, you've discussed what has given us the basis, the signings that happened in Kigali. But after that, the first thing that we had seen create a lot of controversy was on free movement of people. And of course, now people went back to their countries and then they came back and revised it. So we are seeing a lot of back and forth. But we need to know what the cutting point is for you to say, okay, this is enough leeway. We need to get things going from here.
Actually, if you look at the journey of the African integration, which started from the dawn of independence in the early 60s till today, I think we are moving in the right direction. A lot of achievement has been fulfilled. The creation of the African Union itself is a milestone. Before it, Lagos Plan of Action, Abuja Treaty, and then the last kid in the block, the Continental Free Trade Area. This is achieving the milestones of Abuja Treaty, which put the dream of having the African unity. And I think the difference today in the continent is between those who want to move very fast and those who want to move fast enough. But I think we are getting there, and I think there is no other way than opening the space, opening the borders, and doing away with all these inherited borders from the colonial rule. I think we are going in the right direction.
Right now, final point has to do with the baseline. I had mentioned that I would ask you about this, an accountability system between now and the next time that we should see this, the ministers meeting or this particular designated from the states. What do you note about this conversation on the baseline feedback particularly?
Actually, this is an excellent question. Africa is not short of development frameworks, blueprints and all that. The devil is in the implementation. We need to hold ourselves accountable to ourselves, that we have to incrementally build on this. And what we agree on collectively at the continental level, we want to see it happening at the country level. Because policy, at the end of the day, can rise and fall at the country level. And this is where history and our people will judge us that we are moving in this and implementing what we agree on at the continental level.
A final point, please allow me to just ask you before you leave, the digital scheme of things and the youth dividend. I need to hear your view on those two things, digital and the youth.
Digital, we have no other way. The world is moving that way. We have the opportunity of leapfrogging. In terms of latecomers, we can go straight to embrace new technologies, new innovations and all that. And that is the beauty of latecomers. On the peace dividend, this is a continent of young people. We have a huge opportunity to reap the benefit of this dividend. But it can go both ways. It's a ticking bomb. If there is a short window of opportunity, if we do not reap that or we do not address that in terms of policies and all this, it might turn out to haunt us. And the window is very short. We have to act fast on this.
Now, Africa's growth has been forecast for 3.6% in 2018, 3.8% in 2019. But since we're pegging most of our growth on trade, we need to track back on how the modalities of the trade division within this whole ecosystem of things has changed leading up to today.
It has been a process on the CFTA. It's not an ad hoc thing that just happened. In fact, it goes back to around 2010 in Kigali when the Economic Commission for Africa presented a report showing what is happening to intra-African trade to the ministers of trade. It was convened by the African Union Commission. And then they asked themselves, why don't we fast track the realization of the Continental Free Trade Area? And so they asked the African Union Commission and the CFTA and the ECA to go back and come the following year with suggestions on how that can be achieved. And lo and behold, we were able to agree to present something to the ministers on the African Continental Free Trade Area proposals. And they said, yes, this is what we are looking for. They took it to the leaders at their summit in 2012. Right. And the African leaders have actually been very serious about regional integration. Right. So when they saw that they have a proposal through which they can advance and accelerate the trade part of the market integration, I think they did not have to wait anymore. Right. They launched the negotiations in 2015. And within 2 years, here we are. We have the modalities. And not only that, we have 44 signatures of the instruments of the Continental Free Trade Area. Right. And not only that, 2 members, as of yesterday, deposited their ratification instruments. Right. And we expect many more to follow.
Right. So just about to ask the same thing. So regarding Rwanda had taken the forefront on that. Where do we see Rwanda within that roster? Because they had said they would be among the first to ratify as well. It was meant to be 3 countries, Kenya, Ghana, and Rwanda. Where do we leave Rwanda?
Oh, Rwanda has ratified. Right, Niger has also ratified. For your information, it did that. We got that information yesterday. Right. So we already have 4 countries that have ratified, but 2 have deposited the instruments of ratification with the African Union Commission, which is what is expected once you ratify. Deposit the instrument. All right.
Let's talk about preferential market schemes, because this was seen as the way out when we are seeing different economies give the argument on the basis of the investment back into the African Union. We had many analysts say that preferential market schemes might not work, but the arguments were all over the place. What do you think?
Oh, in the African context, our intra-African trade is low compared to what is happening in other sub-regions. In other regions, if you look at Europe, if you look at Asia.
But aside from that, we also have a conjoined effort towards moving in the investment phase of things. Give us your feedback.
We have to remember that at the end of the day, we want to see jobs, we want to see incomes rise, we want to see businesses grow, we want to see fiscal spaces that are sustainable. And so we need to have a baseline whereby we can be able to say that, yes, in 2018, this was the baseline before we started implementing the CFTA. So that when we tell the story of the CFTA, we can have these indicators to show what is. Now, talking about first of all, the important question is that the CFTA in itself is supposed to provide a platform for attracting investments within Africa and also movement of investments within Africa, intra-African investments, and also FDI from outside Africa. And that is the reason why, for the phase 2 of the CFTA negotiations, one of the things that is going to be considered is the whole issue of investments, including investment facilitation. Because once you deal with the removal of tariffs, once you deal with the issue of non-tariff barriers, then you want people to be able to come and put their money to move freely, and also to be able to get returns on their investments. So we expect it not only to be a platform for attracting investments, but also for it to provide a regime, a regulatory regime, so to speak, that make it possible for somebody who invests in Rwanda to be able to set up a similar investment.
Right, and there we have it. Now, the general sentiments from the sessions, as we've heard, and from our previous speakers in this special coverage, is that even as we push forward towards growth and sustainability of trade on the African continent, both the macro and the microeconomic policies have to be considered as deliberately as possible. Stay tuned to CNBC Africa. We'll be continuing with more coverage right here on your channel of choice, First in Business Worldwide.